was a glittering evening at a charity sports gala in Los Angeles. Bright lights, expensive suits, and a crowd filled with celebrities, athletes, and fans who had gathered not just to support a cause, but to see some of the world's most recognized fighters under one roof. In the middle of the buzz sat Manny Pacquiao, not in a tuxedo, not showing off any jewelry, but in a simple jacket, quietly smiling and shaking hands with fans who came up to greet him. His calm presence was almost invisible compared to the flamboyance in the room. Then came the grand entry. Steven Seagal, Hollywood action icon and Aikido master, walked in with his usual swagger, dark shades indoors, a bold laugh echoing across the hall. Cameras turned, people cheered, and Steven enjoyed every second of the spotlight. For years, he had been known as the man who brought martial arts to the movies. Tonight, he was here not just as a guest, but as the loudest voice in the room. After a round of speeches, the microphone somehow found its way into Steven's hands. He looked around, smirked, and then his eyes landed on Manny. The room grew quiet, sensing what was coming. "Boxing," Steven said with a chuckle. "Come on, that's just punching. That's cowboy stuff for the movies, real martial arts. Now that's an art." He tilted his chin toward Manny. "Our friend here, he's good with gloves, sure, but in reality, just a movie cowboy." The words echoed. A few people laughed nervously, others gasped. Cameras zoomed in on Manny's face. But there was no anger, no tension. He simply smiled, lowered his eyes, and sipped his water. Some in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Others whispered, "Did Steven Seagal just insult Manny Pacquiao in public?" But Steven wasn't done. "You can't compare shadow boxing with real discipline. Anyone can throw a punch. It takes an artist to master combat." The crowd now looked at Manny. Would he respond? Would the champion defend himself? The air was heavy with tension, curiosity, and anticipation. What would you do if someone mocked your life's work in front of a crowd? Would you answer back, or stay silent? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe because the next part of this story will shock you. The laughter that followed Steven Seagal's comment echoed through the ballroom like a sharp blade cutting the silence. Some people clapped, others tried to hide their awkward smiles. Everyone knew Manny Pacquiao's reputation as one of the greatest boxers to ever live, but Steven's larger-than-life confidence and Hollywood persona gave weight to his words. Steven leaned on the microphone, shaking his head dramatically as if Manny's career was just a joke to him. "Look, I've spent decades training warriors," he said proudly. "Martial arts is not about looking good on TV or dancing around a ring. It's about discipline, balance, and control. What's boxing? Just fists flying. That's not art. That's a bar fight with rules," the audience murmured. Some nodded in agreement, swept up by Steven's charisma. Others exchanged uneasy glances. Cameras flashed as the crowd anticipated Manny's reaction. Would the humble champion finally fire back? But Manny remained still. He didn't raise an eyebrow, didn't shift in his chair. He simply smiled softly as though Steven's words had no power over him. His calmness contrasted so heavily with Steven's loud bravado that it made people whisper even louder. Steven wasn't satisfied. He wanted a reaction. "Tell me," Steven called across the room, his voice dripping with mockery. "Do you really think punching bags all day makes you a warrior? Do you think dancing around a ring makes you a fighter? You're a nice guy, Manny, but let's be honest, and you're just a cowboy in gloves." This time the crowd gasped audibly. It wasn't just playful banter anymore. It was open disrespect. A young man in the audience couldn't hold it in. "Hey, show some respect, that's Manny Pacquiao you're talking about," he shouted. The room stirred with some clapping in support, while others shushed him, not wanting to ignite a confrontation. Steven chuckled, clearly enjoying the attention. He spread his arms wide. "Respect is earned, not given. Don't worship titles or belts. Show me something real." The tension in the hall grew thick. Even those who had laughed earlier were now leaning forward, watching closely. They weren't sure whether they were witnessing a joke, an ego trip, or the beginning of something historic. Manny finally looked up, his eyes meeting Steven's across the room. For a brief second, silence fell. His expression wasn't angry, nor was it amused. It was patient. as though he was waiting for Steven to dig his own grave. Manny nodded once politely, then looked away. The crowd erupted into whispers. Why isn't he saying anything? Is he scared? Or is he planning something? Steven smirked, mistaking Manny's silence for weakness. See? Even he knows I'm right, Steven said loudly, pointing at Manny. A true martial artist doesn't need belts and spotlights. A cowboy needs an audience. That's the difference. But in that very moment, Manny stood up quietly. He didn't raise his voice, didn't push back. He simply placed his glass of water on the table and began walking slowly toward Steven. The crowd held its breath as cameras turned to follow his every move. Was this finally the moment Manny Pacquiao would respond? Would he defend his honor in front of the world? The conflict was no longer just about words. Something bigger was about to unfold, and everyone in the hall could feel it. Do you believe silence is stronger than words? If someone insulted you publicly, would you stay calm like Manny or clap back like Steven? The crowd's whispers hushed as Manny Pacquiao walked toward the stage. Every step he took was measured, calm, almost too calm for the tension burning in the room. Steven Seagal adjusted his microphone and crossed his arms, wearing a half smile as if he had already won the battle of words. When Manny reached the stage, he didn't snatch the mic, didn't raise his voice. Instead, he offered a polite handshake. Steven looked at the hand for a moment, then smirked and shook it reluctantly. The audience leaned forward, phones raised to capture what was about to unfold. Sir, Manny began softly, his voice steady and respectful. I've always admired martial artists. Discipline and respect. Those values make every style beautiful. I don't see boxing as better or worse, it's just my way of expressing discipline. Steven chuckled into the mic. Discipline? That's what you call it? Jumping around the ring, throwing punches until someone falls down? That's not art, my friend. That's theater. The words cut through the room. A few laughed nervously, but many shook their heads. Manny didn't flinch. He kept smiling, almost as if Steven's words carried no weight. Perhaps, Manny said gently, but every art is tested not by words, but by practice. If you like, we can share the ring tonight. Just friendly sparring, no spotlight, no titles, only respect. The room gasped. It was the invitation everyone had been waiting for. Manny hadn't insulted Steven, hadn't shouted back. He had simply opened the door for truth to reveal itself. Steven raised his eyebrows, pretending to be surprised. You want to spar with me? You really think a cowboy in gloves can stand against a warrior of discipline? Manny only nodded once, his hands folded respectfully. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Oh my God, is this really happening? He just challenged Seagal to spar. No way Seagal says no now. Steven tilted his head back and laughed. Fine, if the cowboy wants to play, let's play. But remember, this isn't Hollywood. You asked for this. The arrogance in his tone was undeniable. The crowd could feel it. Steven believed this would be easy, a quick chance to humiliate Manny in front of everyone. But Manny's calmness told a different story. He bowed slightly and said, "Thank you, sir. In the ring, we will both learn something." That one line struck the crowd like lightning. Unlike Steven, who was promising to prove superiority, Manny's words promised humility, patience, and a deeper kind of strength. Steven scoffed, turning to the crowd. You see? He already admits he wants to learn. Good. Tonight, you'll all see the difference between cinema cowboys and true martial artists. Phones came out everywhere. Social media buzzed as hashtags started trending instantly. Pacquiao vs. Seagal, respect in the ring. People couldn't believe what they were witnessing. A spontaneous showdown between a Hollywood martial arts legend and one of the greatest boxers alive. As the organizers rushed to set up a small ring for a friendly exhibition, the tension doubled. Some fans whispered to each other, "Do you think Seagal even knows what he's in for?" Manny is fast. He's not just a boxer, he's lightning. Others defended Steven. Don't underestimate him, he's a master of Aikido. He knows things Manny doesn't. The divide in the crowd mirrored the clash of egos on stage. On one side, Steven Seagal, full of swagger, confidence, and dismissive laughter. On the other, Manny Pacquiao, humble, calm, and quietly preparing to let his fists speak louder than any words. And so, as the ring was being prepared, the atmosphere was electric. The cameras were ready. The crowd was holding its breath. 2 men, 2 worlds about to collide not with speeches but with skill. The moment of truth was no longer a question of if, it was only a matter of when. As the organizers rushed to set up the exhibition ring, the hall buzzed with anticipation. Phones were out, live streams were rolling, and whispers filled the air. But while the crowd saw only the tension of the moment, few truly understood the journeys that had brought these 2 men here. 2 paths as different as night and day. Steven Seagal had always loved being the center of attention. Born in Michigan, he moved to Japan in his early 20s, immersing himself in the world of Aikido. He trained hard, no doubt, earning his black belt and even opening dojos of his own. For many, this was admirable. But Steven's real fame came not from the dojo, but from the camera. Hollywood embraced him as the unbeatable martial artist, the man who could toss 10 opponents across a room with a flick of his wrist. Movies glorified him, fans cheered him, and soon Steven was not just a martial artist, and he was a celebrity warrior. But with fame came ego. People whispered that Steven started to believe his screen persona was real. He mocked other fighters, dismissed boxers as street brawlers, and laughed at the idea that anyone outside of Aikido truly understood combat. His arrogance grew with every film, every spotlight, every round of applause. In his mind, discipline meant domination, not humility. Manny's journey could not have been more different. Born in poverty in the Philippines, he didn't have the luxury of martial arts schools or movie sets. He had hunger, and he had survival. At just 14, he left home, working odd jobs and sending money back to his family. Boxing wasn't just a sport to him, it was a lifeline. He fought barefoot in the dirt, gloves too big for his hands, in makeshift rings where the prize was enough rice to feed a family for a week. Every punch he threw carried not just power, but desperation, the desperation of a boy who knew his family's next meal depended on it. And yet, even as success came, championships, wealth, worldwide fame, Manny remained grounded. He built schools, hospitals, donated millions to the poor, and even entered politics not for power, but to give back to the people who had nothing. For Manny, discipline was not about domination. It was about humility, about service, about respect for those who struggle. Now in this room, under the bright lights of a charity gala, these 2 worlds stood face to face. On one side, Steven Seagal, the Hollywood warrior, laughing at others, enjoying the spotlight, his ego fed by applause. On the other, Manny Pacquiao, the real fighter, a man who had lived struggle, whose fists carried decades of pain and sacrifice, yet whose heart remained humble. The crowd didn't know all these details, but they could feel the energy. They could sense that this was more than just a sparring match. It was a collision of philosophies, ego versus humility, arrogance versus respect, illusion versus reality. Manny's silence wasn't weakness, it was strength. He had lived through storms harsher than any insult. He didn't need to prove himself with words. He would let the ring speak. Steven, meanwhile, saw silence as surrender. He believed Manny's calmness meant fear, that his own showmanship was already the victory. He laughed, cracked more jokes with the crowd, and strutted like a conqueror, waiting to collect his prize. But the audience was shifting. Slowly, their whispers leaned toward Manny. He's not saying anything, but look at him. He's calm, focused. Another replied, "That's the look of someone who knows." Steven doesn't realize it yet. The stage was set. 2 men, 2 stories, one about to be humbled, the other about to inspire. The ring was finally ready, a small platform in the middle of the ballroom, padded ropes, bright spotlights, and an audience that could hardly sit still. Phones went up, live streams went live, and whispers spread like wildfire. This is actually happening. Steven Seagal climbed into the ring first. his robe flowing dramatically as though he were about to film another action movie. He bowed slightly, then smirked at the audience, soaking in the attention. His confidence was unshakable. Manny Pacquiao followed quietly. No robe, no theatrics, just his simple training shorts and gloves. The crowd erupted into applause, but Manny's eyes stayed focused. He bowed to the ring, touched his gloves together, and stood calmly in his corner. The referee, more symbolic than official, gave a few instructions. Keep it light, no harm, just respect. Steven chuckled and muttered, "Respect is earned," loud enough for the microphones to catch. Manny said nothing. The bell rang. Steven came forward, his movements exaggerated, flowing with dramatic Aikido gestures. He waved his arms, pretending to redirect invisible opponents, and the crowd chuckled. He even shouted, "This is real martial arts," before stepping toward Manny with a playful smirk. Manny stayed still, his eyes locked, studying Steven's movements. His footwork was quiet, balanced, precise. He didn't throw a punch. Not yet. Steven lunged forward with a mock grab, trying to show off his Aikido technique. Manny slipped back effortlessly. The crowd cheered Steven's theatrics, clapping as if they were watching a movie scene. "See? He doesn't even know what's happening," Steven called out, laughing. But then it happened. In a flash, Manny stepped in. A short, sharp movement so fast that most eyes couldn't even follow. His left jab snapped forward like lightning, perfectly timed, perfectly placed. Crack. Steven's head jerked back. His body stumbled a step, his smirk erased in an instant. The crowd gasped collectively, the sound echoing through the hall like thunder. Silence followed. Phones shook as people tried to refocus their cameras. For a moment, the world froze. Steven blinked, stunned, his hands halfway raised. The playful arrogance drained from his face, replaced by shock. He hadn't seen it coming. He hadn't even realized Manny had moved until the punch landed. The crowd erupted. Cheers, shouts, gasps filled the room. "Did you see that? It was so fast. Oh my God, Steven didn't stand a chance." Manny didn't follow up. He didn't press the advantage. He simply stepped back, lowered his gloves, and waited. His expression was calm, almost apologetic, as though reminding everyone this wasn't about hurting someone. It was about truth. Steven touched his lip, shocked to see it reddened. He looked at Manny, then at the roaring crowd. The confidence that had carried him moments earlier was gone. His flashy movements suddenly seemed meaningless against the raw precision of Manny's skill. Whispers turned into chants. "Manny! Manny! Manny!" The undercurrent was undeniable. The truth had been revealed. All the insults, all the arrogance, all the talk about movie cowboys, shattered in a single punch. The illusion of invincibility had cracked, replaced by reality. Steven took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. He raised his hands again, this time slower, more cautious. Manny nodded politely, signaling he was ready if Steven wanted to continue. But the room already knew. The lesson had been delivered. The truth wasn't in Steven's words, nor in his Hollywood swagger. The truth was in Manny's silence, his discipline, his lightning-fast precision. That one punch carried decades of hunger, training, sacrifice, and humility. And it carried a message that everyone in the crowd felt deep in their hearts. Never underestimate someone who has lived through real struggle. The gasps had turned into cheers, the cheers into applause. The entire room, even those who had laughed at Steven's jokes earlier, now stood in respect for Manny Pacquiao. And Steven, for the first time that night, he had no words. What do you think speaks louder? Words and arrogance, or one action at the right moment? If you were in the crowd, how would you have reacted to that punch? The ballroom still echoed with the gasp from that first punch. The sound of gloves against flesh had silenced the laughter, silenced the arrogance, and left even Steven Seagal stunned. For the first time in the evening, the Hollywood star wasn't smirking. He was blinking, almost trying to process what had just happened. Manny Pacquiao didn't move in for another strike. He didn't raise his fists higher to show dominance. Instead, he stepped back, lowered his gloves, and gave Steven a small nod, the kind of nod a teacher gives a student after a difficult lesson. The crowd sensed it immediately. Manny had no intention of humiliating him. He wanted to show something bigger. Respect. Steven straightened himself, breathing heavily. His lips pressed into a thin line as he raised his hands again, trying to recover some dignity. He attempted another flashy Aikido movement, lunging toward Manny. But this time the crowd didn't cheer. They had seen the truth already. They knew who held real mastery in the ring. Manny sidestepped gracefully, placing a soft glove on Steven's shoulder as if saying, "It's okay, calm down." That gesture hit harder than any punch could have. The crowd broke into applause, not for violence but for the humility on display. Steven lowered his arms. His face, once painted with arrogance, now showed something rare: vulnerability. He glanced around the room, seeing the faces of people who had once cheered his jokes now watching him with pity. It was unbearable. And then, Manny spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but in the silence it carried across the hall. "Sir, fighting is not about proving who is better. It is about discipline, respect, and control. You are a great martial artist. But tonight, we both see that words are not the measure of a fighter." The audience erupted in cheers. People clapped, some even whistled. Not because Manny had won, but because of the grace with which he carried victory. Steven looked down. His pride was fractured. He had mocked Manny in front of everyone, reduced his life's work to cowboy stuff. And yet, here Manny was, offering respect instead of ridicule. That humility stung deeper than the punch. He removed his gloves slowly, the arrogance drained from his posture. He turned to Manny and extended his hand, but this time it wasn't forced or half-hearted. It was real. "I underestimated you," Steven admitted, his voice quieter, heavier than before. Manny shook his hand warmly. "No, sir," he replied. "You underestimated boxing. You underestimated hard work. We are all fighters in our own way." The crowd roared, cameras flashed. For them, this wasn't just a sparring session, it was history. A Hollywood warrior humbled not by brutality but by humility. Steven, though still shaken, looked at Manny with a different kind of respect. "I thought you were just a showman," he confessed. "But you are the real deal." Manny smiled softly. "I am just a man who trained, sir, that's all, nothing more." That single line resonated with everyone in the hall. People exchanged glances, nodding. They knew what he meant. Greatness doesn't come from words or fame or arrogance. It comes from discipline, patience, and humility. The atmosphere shifted completely. What had started as a mocking insult had transformed into one of the most inspiring lessons the crowd had ever witnessed. Even Steven Seagal's fans, who had cheered his arrogance earlier, were now clapping for Manny Pacquiao's dignity. The ring wasn't a stage anymore. It was a classroom. And everyone had just been taught a lesson. Real strength isn't loud. It's quiet, humble, and undeniable. Do you believe Manny was right? That true fighting is about discipline and respect, not ego? The room, once buzzing with laughter and arrogance, now stood in awe. The energy had shifted completely. Where Steven Seagal once dominated with jokes and swagger, Manny Pacquiao now filled the space with humility and quiet strength. Steven's hand, still clasped in Manny's, trembled slightly. It wasn't fear. It was something heavier. Realization. The man he had mocked as a movie cowboy had just shown the world the difference between illusion and reality. The crowd began chanting, "Manny! Manny! Manny!" Phones were up. Flashes lit the room, but Manny didn't bask in the glory. He simply smiled, bowed his head slightly, and raised Steven's hand along with his own, signaling to the audience that this was not about humiliation, but about respect. That gesture electrified the hall. Cheers erupted. Some people stood on their chairs. It wasn't just sportsmanship. It was grace. Steven looked at Manny, surprised. Why would you do that after everything I said? Manny's response was simple yet powerful. Because fighting is not about making enemies, it's about making each other better. If I disrespect you, then I disrespect the art we both love. The room went silent for a moment. Even the loudest fans felt that line hit deep. This wasn't just about boxing, it was about life. Steven's shoulders slumped. His arrogance had melted away, replaced with humility. He gave a small bow toward Manny, an unfamiliar but sincere gesture. The crowd gasped softly at the sight. For the first time, Steven Seagal looked not like a star, but like a student learning a lesson. A woman in the audience whispered, "I'll never forget this moment." Another replied, "This is what true champions look like." Manny then addressed the crowd directly. "My friends, remember this. Greatness is not in how many people cheer for you or how many movies show you as strong. Greatness is in how you treat others, even when you have the power to hurt them. Respect is the foundation of every fight, in the ring and in life." The applause was thunderous. Some people even had tears in their eyes. What had started as a spectacle now felt like a sermon, a lesson about humility, respect, and true strength. Steven stepped forward once more, grabbing the microphone. His voice cracked slightly. "I came here tonight thinking I would prove something, but it is I who has been taught. Manny, you are more than a champion. You are a true warrior." The crowd erupted again, louder than before. Manny smiled humbly, put his arm around Steven, and whispered something only a few in the front rows could hear. "Always remember, the fight is not with others, but with yourself." The audience knew they had witnessed something historic. Phones recorded, but people also knew that no video could fully capture the energy of that night. It wasn't about the punch anymore. It was about the lesson. As the lights dimmed and the crowd continued cheering, one message rang clear: respect, humility, kindness, and never judging someone by appearances. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Because your story matters too, and one day it might inspire the world.